Good morning. I'm Nick McCool from MS Now World Headquarters in New York. We are coming on the air at this hour with breaking news out of Washington. The Senate just moments ago voting 50-49 to confirm Todd Blanche as Attorney General. MS Now congressional reporter Kevin Fry is following all of these developments out of Washington. He joined us now. Kevin, I appreciate you being with us at this early hour. So I think it would be helpful to walk our viewers through how we got here, because it was not long ago that this nomination was looking fairly precarious, and yet the announcement just yesterday from the Louisiana Senator Bill Cassidy seems to have changed everything.
Yeah, I mean, look, so the vote fell as we expected it would early in the hours of this morning, which was 50-49, favor largely along party lines, with the exception of two Republicans voting against, that being Senator Susan Collins and Senator Lisa Murkowski. Those are two not infrequent shall we say, butters of the president's agenda on Capitol Hill. There was, of course, also one other senator missing, and that being Senator Mitch McConnell, which was part of the math problem that made it so precarious as to whether or not this nomination would actually get through. We have seen over the last several weeks a slow inch-by-inch move to try to line up the votes for this nomination. Of course, there was that week-long, drawn-out fight between Senators Thom Tillis and John Cornyn and Blanche in the White House over two key issues. One being, of course, this question of that $1.776 billion, $1.8 billion slush fund, anti-weaponization fund that could have benefited January 6th defendants. And then there was also the question of this immunity deal for for Donald Trump and members of his family and his inner circle from IRS audits. Cornyn and Tillis succeeded in getting some promises when it came to the fund. I'm so sorry, early hours of the morning, of the fund, trying to make sure that that was indeed dead. But at the same time, the IRS audit, there are a bunch of kind of loopholes that it remains questionable exactly how many, shall we say, guardrails they ended up getting around that. Nonetheless, it was enough for Tillis and for Cornyn to get on board. And then all the eyes shifted to a handful of other Republican senators who day after day managed to explain whether or not they were going to line up behind this. Obviously, Senator Susan Collins and Murkowski announced they would be against. They had continued concerns about the weaponization, in their view, of the DOJ, and whether or not Todd Blanche would actually only further enforce those concerns. And they also had concerns as to whether or not there were indeed the constrictions around both the IRS audits and that fund, and whether they would actually hold up. At the same time, Senator Cassidy, and this was kind of the last dramatic linchpin, on Friday morning announced from the Senate floor that he would indeed be voting for Blanche. And in some ways, it was almost a speech saying this is the best of the worst options that could come, where he essentially said that by empowering Blanche, by saying yes to Blanche, he would have the ability in some sense to push back on the president as a fully confirmed member of the cabinet, as opposed to someone operating as an acting AG. He had faced also a rather intense lobbying effort from the White House and from the DOJ, and got there and voted yes. And now this nomination has advanced, and Todd Blanche will be the next Attorney General officially. You can drop the acting.
And in a memorable moment there at the very end of that speech, Senator Cassidy even appearing to grow emotional at times, reassuring his constituents at the very least that he had done his due diligence in reaching the conclusion that he would vote to confirm the new Attorney General of the United States, Todd Blanche. I do want to note, Kevin, here, we are already seeing reaction after this vote, which has just come down in the last hour or so, including from Chuck Schumer. What is he saying right now?
Yes, so let me pull up that statement. Basically, he is, and this is perhaps not to be that much of a surprise, Schumer is saying that Senate Republicans have, in his word, quote, handed Trump an excuse on a silver platter to keep up his pervasive, breathtaking corruption. And this goes back to this ongoing concern that Democrats had, that basically because of Blanche's own personal history serving as Trump's defense attorney over the last several years during his various indictments in the intervening years between his first and second terms, that Blanche will essentially just do the bidding of the president. And they point to this settlement agreement that Trump reached with the DOJ around the IRS when it came to that audit and the setup of this fund as examples A and B of a corrupt Department of Justice. Their concern being that rather than the firewall that has largely existed, especially since the Watergate era and the Nixon era, between the DOJ and the White House, where the DOJ, yes, is technically, obviously, an appointed member of the cabinet, but also exists and operates somewhat independently following the laws of justice, as opposed to just doing the president's bidding. The concern being from the Democrats and obviously a handful of Republicans that firewall has basically disappeared and that the DOJ will just be doing the president's bidding, and they point to that personal relationship.
And I know you and all of our colleagues will continue to track that from Capitol Hill. While I have you, Kevin, I do want to mention in the overnight hours, the Senate also voting essentially to confirm this piece of legislation that would fund the government past the midterms. That bill now headed to the House. What more can you tell us there just very quickly?
Yeah, so this is a continuing resolution, as it's called. The goal is to avoid a shutdown right in the advance of Election Day. But keep in mind, the bill that was advanced by the Senate is not perfectly aligned with the one that was passed by the House. And so lawmakers are going to have to work to come to some sort of agreement when they return after the August recess. But this is the chance that the Senate Republicans and Democrats have, and this passed overwhelmingly in a bipartisan fashion, to basically set a mile marker on their part. Part of the concern coming out of the House bill was that it doesn't address, in their view, some of the White House's demands. So this updated bill is now going to be the one that the two chambers are going to have to negotiate to try to figure out if they can avoid a shutdown. Neither party wants a shutdown right before an election. It's the last thing that they want to go home to their voters and say, well, the government's not operating, please vote for me.
MS Now congressional reporter Kevin Fry, thank you so much once again for taking the time early this morning to walk us through all of this. We appreciate it. That is the breaking news at this hour. We will have much more on this later this morning on the weekend, starting at 7 a.m. Eastern. I'm Nick McCool at MS Now World Headquarters in New York. We return you now to Dateline, already in progress.
Joining us now, Sabrina Siddiqui, national politics reporter for The Wall Street Journal, and Kimberly Atkins-Storr, MS Now political analyst, columnist for the Boston Globe, and writer of the Supreme Court newsletter, The Gavel. Hey, ladies. Thanks for kicking off Saturday with us. Sabrina, implicit in Bill Cassidy's message, at least through, based on my interpretation, was basically him saying, look, we could get Todd Blanche or we could get someone like Matt Gaetz, and I'm going to go with Todd Blanche. What's the way that you read it?
I think that Bill Cassidy was essentially looking for a way to rationalize why he is voting to confirm Blanche, especially when he has nothing to lose. He already lost his primary in part because President Trump wanted to punish him for voting to impeach him after January 6th. And, I want to take a step back with Cassidy because, he voted for RFK Jr. to be Health and Human Services Secretary.
The vote, and
he was the deciding vote. And it was because he said he had gotten assurances from Kennedy that he would not tamper with vaccine policy. Mm-hmm. And then he later came to regret that vote. They have since clashed numerous times over RFK Jr. doing precisely that. So,
and what he did was on disagreements that was far more personal to him.
And it was far more personal to him as a doctor. But, what assurances does he actually have from Blanche? He's given these assurances in writing about the anti-weaponization fund and, the immunity deal with respect to the president and his sons and the IRS. But what stops him from reviving that anti-weaponization fund tomorrow if President Trump asks him to do so? And that's a question that he really could not address in those remarks.
Absolutely nothing stops Blanche and the president from redoing that. I'm not a lawyer, but I hear the one at the table is shaking her head. Yes,
that is correct.
I want to play some more sound from Bill Cassidy when he was talking about what he was concerned about at the DOJ, as he was saying he was going to vote for the guy who's going to head up the DOJ.
I'm particularly concerned about episodes of apparent lawfare. DOJ bringing suits against political enemies. I am realistic that President Trump can be unrelenting on this, but this will be true no matter who the Attorney General is. When former Attorney General Bill Barr endorsed Mr. Blanche, he said Mr. Blanche will run the department as effectively as anyone can under President Trump. Some have called that faint praise. I don't think that it is. I think it is a reality.
David, please let no one who has to say yes to me having a job give that sad little endorsement that he has been given to Todd Blanche. When you see and hear someone saying he won't be good at this job, I think, but he will be better than this other person who doesn't actually exist, when what senators are supposed to be doing is voting on what is before them.
That's right.
And using their morals, their scruples, their own beliefs, their understanding of how this person is going to operate and how the department and the agency is going to operate in order to say yes or no to this person. The idea that he is particularly concerned about episodes of apparent lawfare, does he think that they're going to stop with Todd Blanche at the top of at the DOJ?
That's basically his argument. It's like, you know what, no matter what, President Trump is going to want to continue to use this agency as a weapon against his perceived political enemies. So whether it's Blanche, whether it's somebody else, why not, why not? That is not the job. Imagine going out. Imagine that being your ending legacy in the Senate, is that you greenlit someone who, as you said, Eugene, you're supposed to be evaluating his record. Todd Blanche, who absolutely mangled the handling of the Epstein files, who okayed this weaponization fund enthusiastically until that was going to cost him his job. And then he said, oh, yes, here's a note. I promise not to do that. When he is not a party to the settlement, that weaponization fund comes out of. So he doesn't have the power to stop it. He is someone who has gone after President Trump's political enemies with glee. You're looking at his probably the worst, least qualified attorney general candidate. Remember back in the day when Zoe Baird couldn't get confirmed because she didn't pay Social Security taxes on her nanny.
Yes.
Look at how far we've come. We have somebody who is an agent of authoritarianism who just got the okay from a senator who, as you said, had nothing to lose.
I would say how far we've fallen.
Yeah.
But, Senator Cassidy isn't the only one giving cover to now Attorney General Todd Blanche in the run-up to this. Let's look at what Senator Thom Tillis, another target of President Trump's, what he said to Jonathan Lemire on Morning Joe on Thursday about another rationale for why Todd Blanche should be confirmed.
You have praised his judgment, but how can you square that with his willingness to go along with these measures in the first place? If he had that judgment in the first place and changed his mind perhaps under duress, why do you think he's fit for Attorney General?
Because I believe that there are a number of things that Todd have done that were wise in protecting the president. Look, the big problem I have with this administration are people who are not protecting the president and not giving him unvarnished advice.
Sabrina, with that answer, we have now officially moved from the Department of Justice being an independent agency, even though it's under the umbrella of the executive. There is supposed to be independence between the Attorney General and the executive, the Attorney General and the President of the United States. And from everything we've seen, that independence has been whittled away. And in that response from Senator Tillis, it is now an afterthought. There is no more independence. The job of the Attorney General is to protect the president.
It's sort of just demonstrating how the president's approach to government, where you don't work for the government, you work for him, has really been somewhat normalized among Republicans, certainly. And one of the other things that I thought was really striking in comments that Senator Tillis made, because he was part of the deal, right? It was him and Senator Cornyn in order to advance the nomination out of committee, who came up with this deal with Blanche around scaling back or paring back the IRS immunity and, killing the anti-weaponization fund, even though days later Trump talked about reviving it. He also said, Tillis, that, if it ends up coming to pass that Todd Blanche goes back on his word that President Trump does revive this anti-weaponization fund, then the president will be answerable to the American people. But it was sort of another telling moment where it's like, well, typically senators, U.S. lawmakers who are elected by their constituents, by voters, are also answerable to the American people.
They're like, oh, someone should really do something about this.
You know what? I'm glad you said that, Sabrina, because it reminds me that rationale is the same rationale Mitch McConnell used after January 6th to not vote to convict Donald Trump in his impeachment. He's like, this isn't for us. He will be held accountable by not us, by the courts.
As if Congress does not have that oversight authority that is such a core function of what they are sent to Washington to do.
I still just really want to know what Bill Cassidy was thinking, and if there were these backroom conversations for him to actually provide cover, if this was an act of generosity or an act of self-preservation. But I think let's move on to the Epstein of it all. I mean, I'm being generous by describing it as generosity, but in terms of giving Murkowski and Collins the ability to say no, since they're in,
And they have been known to cut these deals in order to protect their colleagues. He's on his way out.
Because he did look pained when he was reading his statement. He did not believe it. He did not look like
I'm exhausted of
what he was saying.
When you said self-preservation, that's why I was like, that part, because part of me wonders, we hear with our ears in Washington that the threats that are leveled at these members by the president on social media is the tip of the iceberg. I wonder what kind of threats Senator Cassidy could have been getting from other entities. Like, if you don't do this.
And you know what that's called? That's called corruption. If he is not able to vote the way his conscience and the oath that he took directs him to vote because of some other threat, that is corruption. That is anti-democratic. And I think it's important to put a pin in that. That is not just how Washington works.
Correct.
That is not just how Washington is supposed to work. That means that the system is fundamentally broken in a way that takes the power from the people of the American people and puts it in the hands of these dark influences behind members of Congress. And that is absolutely unacceptable.
That's a very good point. Because I don't think we don't really traditionally view the way that Trump leverages his power in that kind of way by targeting members in some ways that lead to death threats. And as a form of corruption. But in terms of the Epstein of it all, let's listen to Amanda Roberts and Jess Michaels quickly, who responded to Blanche getting the votes for confirmation.
It's a very chilling message that they are sending across the country and to the survivors that are in their very district. It's telling them that at the end of the day, that they will not vote for them, they will not fight for them, and they will not hear them.
If you're saying you're going to vote on this man to be the Attorney General of the United States, there's no good reason to not take a peek at the files, given we've sent you files directly to your office. If senators vote yes, it means they do not care. They are refusing to look.
Sabrina, I'm curious just what you're hearing from voters and whether or not the Epstein issue is still high up on their priority lists or in their consciousness, because yesterday it was not mentioned, at least as often as I thought it would be, by any of the lawmakers who ultimately voted for Todd Blanche. And even, I believe, with Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski also did not make much mention of the Epstein issue either.
You know, I think that it's an issue that it may not rank as a top priority for voters when they're casting their ballots, right? We talk about the economy, cost of living, which I know we'll get to after the break. But it is something that is still feeding into this idea, at least among Democrats and even some other voters, about corruption and how the Trump administration has handled the files, about influence as well, and protecting the elite who have been implicated in the Epstein files. And it's something that I think also has frustrated Republicans too, right? I mean, that is one of the issues issues among Republicans where the president actually gets his lowest mark. So it's something that could potentially still suppress turnout when it comes to people that Republicans need to show up at the polls, just because of the frustration around the lack of transparency from the Trump administration regarding the investigation.
It's also wrong. Like
and
it is
illegal.
It's
literally illegal.
Yeah.
Like there is a law in place that he has to release these files, and he hasn't. When I was in law school, that was called breaking the law.
It's a very chilling message that they are sending across the country and to the survivors that are in their very district. It's telling them that at the end of the day, that they will not vote for them, they will not fight for them, and they will not hear them. We have been spending the past couple of weeks, since before his hearing, knocking on the doors, dropping off files, dropping off books, calling our senators all day today. We've been on the phone, trying to get on the phone with them, for them to hear us, and no answer. And so it's a very chilling message. I think the country really needs to pay attention to every single senator that votes yes for Todd Blanche, and they need to keep that in mind when they're headed to the polls this fall.
Sky, I want to play some sound from Senator Bill Cassidy from earlier today on the Senate floor and talk about it on the other side.
The choice is not between perfection and Mr. Blanche. It is between Mr. Blanche and another acting attorney general who may not run the department effectively under President Trump. This puts at risk the progress made fighting violent crime, human and drug trafficking, and fraud.
I think all of us are sorry for so many things that you guys have gone through. But I think I'm mostly sorry that the leadership of this country would dare mention human trafficking in the same Senate floor speech that they would say they're voting for Todd Blanche, who went down to Glenn Maxwell, spent days with her, put her in a cushy Club Fed next to the Theranos lady and a Real Housewife, and still vote for Todd Blanche. That Bill Cassidy and these other folks who say that they care so much about the girls and women in this country who care about human trafficking would dare breathe a word of that in front of the Senate cameras and then vote the way that he is going to vote. And I'm curious, Sky, for you listening to that and thinking about your sister, what's going through your mind?
I mean, you know, in a lot of ways I'm speechless because, you know, how much more do we have to advocate? How much more do we have to say in order for, you know, for these senators to believe us? Every single survivor that I know is encouraging the Senate to vote no on Todd Blanche. And, you know, on the point of Ghislaine Maxwell being transferred to a minimum security prison, my sister once said that Epstein was Pinocchio and she was Geppetto. She was feeding the girls. So she's a monster, and he transferred her to a minimum security prison. And what I would say to the senators is you have to judge him on his actions, on what he did, not compare him to another attorney general that might come in. You have to compare him to what he did and hold him to account. Now, I would encourage, there's three different senators that we are encouraging to step forward. That would be Moreno, Curtis, and Sullivan. And, you know, Murkowski came forward and said the constituents of Alaska essentially are saying that they are against Todd Blanche. Well, if that's the case, then Sullivan should also be voting no. So we're not done with this battle. Even though it's a steep road ahead, we're still going to fight until the very end.
Why have you decided to target those other lawmakers that you mentioned, including Bernie Moreno?
I think it's really important. I think they are at a level that they could hear us. You know, I think Senator Moreno, this is about victims of abuse on a large scale. And it's about women all over this country asking their leadership to stand up for them and do the right thing. Each of these senators, their constituents want this. You know, Murkowski's in Alaska, so why not? Why wouldn't he align with his constituents as well? So it's hopefully senators that we feel like we can reach. We've tried to get on the phone with them and reach out to them, and we're hoping they're still willing to speak to us.
What kind of country manufactures criminal prosecutions against political opponents? What kind of leader repels prosecutors and investigators who hunt down terrorists and adversaries of the United States of America? What is the character of a man who cheers the, quote, canning of hundreds of years of national security expertise inside the Department of Justice and the FBI at a right-wing political conference? What man has so hardened a heart that he looks at victims of sex trafficking and says, quote, "Get to the point"? What lawyer participates in language so menacing toward judges whose rulings he disagrees with that those judges fear for their lives and their children's lives, and then turns up the heat on judges after they speak out? What man scrapes the bottom of the ethical barrel to create a legal structure around Donald Trump's brazen corruption by representing the fraudster and the government he seeks to defraud by cocooning him in legal immunity from the IRS? What kind of conservative leads the Department of Justice to the point of being disbelieved, disrespected, and distrusted by even some of the most conservative judges in the federal system? And what Republican cheers the purge of bright rising star prosecutors like Eric Siebert and Danielle Sassoon? The answer, tragically, is that that country is America. This is who we are right now. And all those actions were directed by or supported by Todd Blanche. One final question for you this afternoon. What man, what member of the Senate, who has already lost his job, lost his opportunity to serve because of Donald Trump, then fails to tell the truth about all this and the threat that Todd Blanche poses to the rule of law? Sadly, we have that answer too. His name is Bill Cassidy. The same Senator Bill Cassidy who's being forced out of the Senate after Donald Trump endorsed his primary opponent and he lost re-election. For just a few hours, Todd Blanche's confirmation was on thin ice today. That happened after Senators Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski announced they would vote no. One more vote would have sunk Blanche's AG bid altogether. But then Senator Cassidy stepped in, threw him a lifeline, took to the Senate floor earlier today and handed over the keys to the Department of Justice and the rule of law to Donald Trump with this speech. Watch.
I am particularly concerned about episodes of apparent lawfare, DOJ bringing suits against political enemies. I am realistic that President Trump can be unrelenting on this, but this will be true no matter who the Attorney General is, and this is the rationale for having a Senate-confirmed Attorney General with more leverage to push back. Mr. Blanche is not perfect, and he will tell you this, but the choice is not between perfection and Mr. Blanche. It is between Mr. Blanche and another acting Attorney General who may not run the department effectively under President Trump, and who indeed may not be as good as Mr. Blanche. All considered, I will vote for Mr. Blanche. I'll be criticized for this vote. What's new?
What are we even talking about? Quote, more leverage to push back? To say that about Todd Blanche, who has done everything in his power, things that Pam Bondi wouldn't even do, to reshape the Department of Justice, basically take the justice out of the Department of, in Donald Trump's image. Before Senator Cassidy delivered that speech, which made Todd Blanche the Attorney General, survivors of Jeffrey Epstein's abuse sought a meeting with Cassidy, writing this, quote, to Senator Cassidy, you have a record of standing with survivors of human trafficking and sexual assault. A vote to confirm Todd Blanche would be a vote against those survivors. We hope you will meet with us today and urge you to vote no on Todd Blanche's confirmation. The request was ignored. Senate Republicans rubber stamping the Attorney General confirmation of a man who's already done everything in his power to end DOJ's independence is where we begin today with Democratic Senator Adam Schiff of California. Senator, where do we go from here?
Well, I sadly think that it's likely now Blanche has the votes. I was deeply disappointed to hear those comments you just aired from one of my colleagues. When you go through a litany of the reasons why somebody shouldn't be confirmed, the fact that they have abused the Department of Justice to go after the president's enemies, the incredibly not just botched but wrongful handling of the investigation into Epstein and his victims, the cover-up of some of those materials on the one hand, on the other hand, pushing out materials that expose the victims to being victimized again by publishing their names, their photographs, this slush fund he tried to set up. You go through this long litany of abuses by the Attorney General, and you could have one of two reactions. One is to say, this person should not be the Attorney General, and we're going to oppose him, and we're going to demand the president send us someone better. Or the other is to say, nonetheless, I'm going to support him because the president might send us somebody worse. It only makes sense, I think, to defeat someone like Todd Blanche and insist on something better, insist on someone who will not go along with these collusive settlements, who won't continue to act like the president's criminal defense lawyer. And Nicole, I think you're absolutely right when you said that whether he is confirmed or is an acting, even if he's confirmed, the moment he does something the president doesn't like, the president is more than willing to just fire him. So I think that doesn't give the public any greater protection.
I had Judge Esther Salas and Judge Jack McConnell on yesterday about the vitriol being directed at federal judges in the judiciary from Donald Trump, from the general counsel at the Department of Homeland Security, who has a list called, quote, the worst of the worst about judges, and from Todd Blanche himself. Let me show you what Judge Jack McConnell said yesterday.
What we're seeing right now is out of the executive branch, it appears to be an attempt to delegitimize the courts, and they're doing that through trying to delegitimize judges. The deputy attorney general, soon potentially to be the attorney general, said we're at war with the courts, and he called people to action on it. These kind of things are not acceptable in a democratic society where we follow the rule of law. It's across the board. People appointed by Democratic presidents, people appointed by Republican presidents have been subjected to this personal attack on judges in an attempt to delegitimize them. It's really an attack on the judiciary itself. And the very foundation of our democracy.
Senator, if Democrats retake control of the Senate in the fall, what could you do to hold, in the judge's words there, quote, the executive accountable for what judges themselves say is a clear attempt to, quote, delegitimize the rule of law in America?
Well, I think the judge is absolutely right about what we're seeing go on, and it is more broad than just the judiciary. We see the president attack the press when the press reports in a way that he doesn't like. Those are enemies of the people, and likewise, any branch of government, including the judiciary, that stands up to the president. And frankly, the judiciary has been the savior, at least the lower courts, during these tumultuous past 2 years. So many of the president's illegal actions have been shut down by judges appointed by both Democratic presidents and Republican presidents. That's been a rare bright side in terms of our democracy. So they're going after it. As part of the majority, if the majority flips, we'll be able to delve into what the department is doing or what they're not doing, what resources are being provided to help protect judges, strengthening those resources as necessary, and I think fully expose this campaign to really endanger some of these lower court judges that we see from both the rhetoric that's being used, but also these constant attacks. To imagine that the Attorney General or acting Attorney General is treating a co-equal branch of government this way would have been unthinkable in the near past, but now it is an everyday occurrence.
Senator, I want to show you something Todd Blanche said that to me seems to invite more questions about criminal prosecutions of people that maybe aren't as notable as a former Olympian. Here he is when asked about Jeanine Pirro's job being on the line.
Declined to say whether you stand by Jeanine Pirro's decision to drop that case. What message does it send, though, if President Trump fires a U.S. attorney because she determined there was not sufficient evidence to charge 4 people with a crime?
Did he fire her?
I mean, what message would it send, I said, if
hypothetically, if the president chose to fire a United States attorney, it turns out he's allowed to do that because he's the president of the United States.
I mean, no one was asking him that question. So back to your point about the press, it's a lack of good faith, transparency from that podium. But we know they don't care about the press. What does it say to you, though, that this is a case around which there's friction and that the now likely to be confirmed Attorney General is not standing on the side of the extremely political actor who simply drew a line the way Bill Barr did after Donald Trump lost at this extraordinary play? She simply seemingly refused to manufacture evidence against someone who didn't do what Donald Trump said he did, which was to vandalize the reflecting pool, which instead was destroyed by a crappy contractor who Donald Trump hired in a no-bid contract. What does it say that the Attorney General won't defend his employee who seemingly refused to manufacture evidence?
Well, it's so startling when I hear Blanche say something like that. Turns out the president has a right to do that. What he's basically saying is the president has a right to fire a prosecutor who won't bring an illegitimate case that he wants brought. This is part and parcel with Blanche saying that the president has both a right and a duty to go after his enemies. I listen to statements like that, which are unthinkable for any legitimate prosecutor, and I wonder what happened to the Todd Blanche who was once a respected prosecutor in the Southern District of New York, because he's now unrecognizable. I also feel a sense, and maybe you too, Nicole, of utter vertigo when Jeanine Pirro is now the voice of reason. What world are we living in? How did that happen? But you know that you're in some totally upside down world when she is saying, well, we need to dismiss this case because turns out we don't have any evidence. But this is Blanche, and this is why it's so appalling that he may get confirmed today. This is somebody willing to say the president is more than his rights to fire a prosecutor who doesn't bring an illegitimate case. The president can tell us to bring a case with no evidence against his enemies. That's just fine. He has a right and even a duty to do it. And what's more, I will help him.
Future of the Justice Department on the line. I want to bring in Connecticut Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal. He's a member of the Judiciary Committee. Senator, what is your reaction to what you just heard from Bill Cassidy today, the reasoning that he laid out and basically how he got to yes, even an unenthusiastic one?
Deep disappointment, because this vote is so cravenly wrong for the country, as well as ultimately, I think, for Senator Cassidy. I think it will go down as one of his graver mistakes, and not surprising because I have predicted all along that Republicans would support Blanche in spite of his being unfit and his being more loyal to the president than to the Constitution or to the country. And so I am really disappointed, but not surprised.
You know, at one point, Cassidy complained about what he described as a, quote, cycle of presidents using the DOJ to prosecute their enemies. And then he said this. Listen.
I am realistic that President Trump can be unrelenting on this, but this will be true no matter who the Attorney General is. When former Attorney General Bill Barr endorsed Mr. Blanche, he said Mr. Blanche will run the department as effectively as anyone can under President Trump. Some have called that faint praise. I don't think that it is. I think it is a reality.
As effectively as anyone can under President Trump? I mean, Cassidy was clear. He had what he was saying were lawfare concerns. But it sounds like he's taking those, recognizing that they might be real, and saying, well, it doesn't really matter. We can't do much about it anyway. And he might put someone worse in.
That's why this vote is so deeply disappointing, because, in effect, it's an abdication of responsibility. You know, the Senate of the United States, in its advise and consent function, has to take a stand in favor of the rule of law and against conflicts of interest and corruption, which Todd Blanche will enable President Trump to do, whether it is the cryptocurrency corruption that has enabled Donald Trump to make $1.4 billion last year alone, or the monuments and the arch and the ballroom of the East Wing, which involves donations and contributions to his PAC or other projects, or simply this sham sludge fund I call it a thug fund, $1.8 billion to the people who rioted and were convicted of felonies, and then the tax immunity. He's enabling Donald Trump's corruption, and to say that somebody else would do the same thing, I think, is really ducking and dodging an essential responsibility.
I also can't help but think about the fact that Bill Cassidy has been in this position before. He was really the linchpin on RFK Jr. He got some assurances that RFK Jr. seemingly reneged on when it came to vaccine credibility. Vaccine denialism is what he ended up getting from RFK Jr. Not exactly shocking when you look at the pattern. But I wonder if there is a conversation among the Republicans that you talk to that this is an administration that, going along to get along doesn't seem to work, because he got on board with that and still got primaried effectively by a Trump-backed candidate. I mean, is there a recognition of that? And if there is or there isn't, do you as Democrats think that there is any future moment where these Republicans will vote any differently, or does it not matter? Do the political stakes that they no longer have to be beholden to not change the underlying fact that they are just still Republicans?
As I said when I was asked repeatedly what Republicans would do on this vote, I've seen this movie before. We all have. And unfortunately, it has ended this way before. But ultimately, the answer to Republicans' lack of spine will be at the ballot box. Senator Cassidy was defeated because Donald Trump opposed him in the primary. And you would think he'd be liberated by, in effect, having nothing left to lose. That is part of why I'm so deeply disappointed, because this vote could have been a matter of conscience and conviction. And I think that his vote for Blanche is simply more evidence that the Trump cult is alive and well in the Republican Party. He has taken over that party, and Democrats need to be strong in mobilizing support at the ballot box against Republicans. We should have no illusions that somehow Republicans are going to break ranks and follow their conscience or conviction. We need to take back control of the Senate as well as the House.
I think that's probably the right conclusion to draw. We're talking about Cassidy's vote. It's really the promise of a vote. Do you have any sense of when the Blanche vote itself is actually going to be?
We are learning right now what the schedule is going to be for the rest of the day. We're voting on the Russian sanctions bill, which I championed with Senator Graham. Really evidence that we can cooperate and work together on a bipartisan basis. The vote will be overwhelming in favor of scorching sledgehammer sanctions and tariffs against the purchasers of Russian oil and gas that are fueling Putin's war machine, his slaughter of Ukrainians literally every night with hundreds of missiles and drones. As you well know, and others who are watching, it is the war crime of this century. And we are saying to Vladimir Putin, and he's probably watching the Senate right now, we will stand with Ukraine. And to Ukraine, we're saying you are not alone, in a very bipartisan way.
This is some of the final work that Senator Graham was doing before he died. You were his partner in this. You and I have had so many conversations about this bill because it's one of the rare pieces of legislation that had upwards of 80 co-sponsors. It was bipartisan, and yet it sort of languished in the Senate for over a year because Republican leadership was waiting for a high sign from the White House to say, all right, go ahead, you can put it on the floor now. I understand the diplomatic reasons that was done, but when you talk to the Ukrainians, and when you and Senator Graham were having conversations with people like Zelensky, how much time and leverage was lost because this bill was waited on? I recognize what you're saying about the impact it'll have now, but it could have had that impact a year ago.
That is a really important, excellent point, Ali. And Senator Graham and I went to Ukraine together 7 or 8 times. I've been there 10 times. And Zelensky came here just last week, and his message to us was, we need the tariffs bill. It has been a constant refrain of mine, and it was of Senator Graham's, and ultimately, fortunately, the White House has sided with us. President Trump has said he will sign this bill. Ukraine has turned the tide. It is now taking back territory. It's reaching deep into Russia with missiles and drones. And I think President Trump has recognized that Zelensky has cards that he can play. Ukraine has tools that they can use to finish the job. Their fight is our fight because Putin will continue this slaughterous aggression against our allies, and we will have an obligation to put our own sons and daughters in harm's way if he attacks Poland or Sweden or Finland or any of the Baltic states. And so our own national security is at stake. That recognition underlying President Trump's support, I think, is tremendously important. I'd argue it's overdue, but today we're taking an important step in the right direction.
And I know you rushed here from the Senate floor to make this live shot with us. I really appreciate that. I can also give you an update. No vote is official until it's gavelled, but it does look like this sanctions bill right now has enough support to pass. The vote currently 65-9, which makes sense. A lot of bipartisan co-sponsors. But Senator Richard Blumenthal, thank you for coming on, talking with us about that and all the other news up in the Senate right now.
Thank you.